as in Belgium, ground flak units beat them off, inflicting heavy casualties. Indeed, in this engagement, the RAF incurred the greatest rate of loss it ever sustained in any single operation, losing 40 out of 71 planes. By that afternoon, all three Panzer divisions, 1st, 2nd and 10th, were across the river and had repulsed a French counterattack. Commanding them was General Hans Guderian. Aged 52, Guderian was a pioneer of blitzkrieg tactics and its most outstanding exponent. Although the German High Command mistrusted Guderian's revolutionary theories, Hitler found them attractive and had sanctioned the earlier formation of Panzer divisions. In command of an armoured corps for the invasion of Poland, Guderian had played a key role in the German victory. His tanks achieved deep penetration with such incredible speed, they earned their commander the nickname Hurrying Heights. Despite his success, the High Command continued to feel uneasy about Guderian's methods of striking into enemy terrain far ahead of infantry support. Consequently, when arrangements were being finalized for the Western Offensive, they made his command subordinate to the more conservatively minded General Paul Ludwig von Kleist. With his tanks safely across the Meuse, a number of options were open to Guderian. He could wait for the infantry, who were still 36 hours away from Sedan, to catch up. He could push on towards Paris, or swing round to take the Maginot defences from the rear. However, Guderian ordered 1st and 2nd Panzer to change direction and drive west toward the Ardennes Canal, with the objective of breaking clear through the French defences. The Ardennes Canal formed the hinge between the French 2nd and 9th armies, and if Guderian could breach that line, he would split apart the Allied armies and strike at the flank and rear of the forces moving to Belgium. The main danger was that the swing west would leave his left flank exposed, and he left the 10th Panzer and the Gross-Deutschland Regiment to guard against any Allied counterstrike. Reacting to the German breakthrough at Sedan, the French ordered the crack 3rd Armored Division to attack the Sedan bridgehead on the morning of the 14th. However, it failed to reach its start lines until late that afternoon, and also found itself without artillery or infantry support. The local commander, 2nd Army's General Hunsinger, called off the attack and ordered the division's tanks to be dispersed amongst his infantry units, thus dismantling the one Allied force which stood a chance of repelling the Panzers. Hunsinger also decided to pull back his left flank to guard against a German thrust into eastern France. This merely widened the Sedan reach from 5 miles to 15. Further up the River Meuse, German Panzers had also crossed at Monthermé and Dinan, and severely battered the units of General Corrap's 9th Army. The Dinan crossing had been made by 7th Panzer, under the command of a 48-year-old Major General Erwin Rommel. By the evening of the 15th, Guderian's Panzers had broken through the defences on the Ardennes Canal, and the roads to the west lay open. Yet that very evening, Kleist, worried that Guderian's forces were overextended, ordered him to halt and to confine his troops to the bridgehead already gained. Guderian argued forcefully against the order and received permission to continue the advance for another 24 hours in order to widen the bridgehead. With his customary boldness, Guderian made the most of this permission, advancing 50 miles as far as the river was. To his right, Rommel also advanced some 50 miles, capturing 10,000 prisoners and 100 tanks, for the loss of only 35 killed and 59 wounded. At nightfall on the 16th, Guderian was again ordered to halt. Neither Hitler nor his high command could quite believe how easily the French had been overcome. They were still fearful of a strong counterattack against the vulnerable left flank, and Hitler insisted on Guderian waiting until an infantry corps could come up and form a flank shield. As Guderian's panzers were slicing through French defences to the south, in the north, the Germans were also gaining the upper hand. On May the 12th and 13th, the first major tank battle of the war took place. At Verdun, the French First Army's two light mechanized divisions came into contact with powerful elements of the German 3rd and 4th Panzer divisions, ably supported by Stuka dynamos. On the first day, the French tanks did well, proving that on a one-to-one basis they could match the much vaunted Panzers. The Samuras in particular could stand more than one hit by all but the heaviest German tank cannon. However, as the battle progressed, the Panzer's superior tactics enabled them to outmaneuver the French repeatedly, and at nightfall on the 13th, the French tanks withdrew. That same evening, the tanks of the 9th Panzer Division reached the outskirts of Rotterdam, and the Dutch position, despite heroic resistance, became hopeless. The next day, following ferocious Luftwaffe bombing raids on Rotterdam, Holland capitulated. The German breakthrough in the Meuse reduced Gamelin's entire strategy to tatters. Realizing the extent of the catastrophe, French Premier Paul Reynaud phoned Winston Churchill early on the 15th to say, "We have lost the battle." Churchill insisted that the advancing panzers would have to stop soon to resupply, at which stage they could be attacked and cut off. The sheer speed of the German advance had thrown Gamelin and his commanders completely off balance. In trying to devise effective counterstrokes, they kept thinking in terms of infantry pace rather than panzer pace, and so were consistently too slow in responding to the changing situation. Time and again, they would designate a halt line where the German advance could be stemmed, only to find that the panzers had already passed that line. Early on the 15th, General Giraud was switched from the 7th Army to take over the shattered remnants of the 9th Army. Late that night, Gamelin, realizing the breach at Sedan was irreparable, ordered the whole Allied front in Belgium to be withdrawn to the line of the River Scheldt. Poor liaison meant that the BEF and the Belgians did not receive the order until the following day. On May the 16th, Paul Reynaud took steps to replace Gamelin and summoned General Maxime Weygand from Syria to assume command. Weygand was 73 years old and had been recalled from retirement just the previous Weygand's ideas were just as outdated as Gallman's, and so his succession to the command saw no significant change in Allied tactics. Following the French collapse at Sedan, the British War Cabinet decided that they would send no more RAF fighters across the Channel. On May the 17th, the Royal Navy were informally asked to draw up plans for the possible evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force from France. In the south, on May the 17th, a counterattack was launched against the Panzer corridor by Colonel de Gaulle's 4th Armoured Brigade, but this was easily repulsed. On May the 18th, Guderian reached Peronne, on to the north, Rommel occupied Cambrai. That same night, General Giraud arrived at his new headquarters to find that the 41st Panzer Corps had got there before. Early the following morning, he was captured by a German tank patrol. Later that day, de Gaulle's 4th Armoured Brigade mounted another attack against Guderian's flank, but the Panzers, well supported by Stukas, again beat him. To the north, on May the 17th, Louvain and Brussels were occupied by the German 6th Army. As the Allied troops retreated westwards through Belgium, they began to threaten the right flank of the German advance. In the early hours of May the 20th, Rommel occupied the strategic heights near Arras. He was about to be attacked by the British Expeditionary Force. The offensive, launched on May the 21st, was supposed to be made by 2 British and 8 French divisions. However, the French were still not ready at the allotted time, and so the British had to attack on their own. With only 3 infantry battalions and 74 tanks. Nevertheless, they took Rommel's forward units completely by surprise and succeeded in driving them back 10 miles, destroying a large number of Panzers. The German artillery could make little impression on the heavily armoured Matildas, and in desperation, Rommel formed a gun line, made up largely of flak 88s. Firing over open sights, the German guns finally stemmed the British advance. One 88 battery alone knocked out 9 British tanks. Heavy attacks by Stukas later that evening forced the British to withdraw. As the British Expeditionary Force was preparing to attack at Arras, General Weygand was startled to learn that Guderian's panzers had reached the Channel coast the previous evening. The Allied armies in the north were now completely cut off. After much debate, it was decided the Allies would fall back to a new front marked by Valenciennes, the River Escaut, the old frontier position from Meaux to Alloin, and the River Lys. A strong offensive was also planned, involving a simultaneous strike from both north and south. While returning to his headquarters, General Billot was killed in a car crash, and it was not until the following day that his successor received the necessary orders. The French First Army was consequently behind schedule. As the Allies effected the withdrawal to their new positions, their progress was severely hampered by the flood of refugees fleeing the advancing Germans and continuous Luftwaffe bombing raids. On May the 22nd, Brachich ordered Army Group A to swing right. It was to head for a line through Armentières, Ypres and Ostend, cutting off the Channel ports as they advanced. Army Group B was to wheel its left flank around to face north, thus strengthening the walls of the tram. That same day, 2nd Panzer reached Boulogne, and on May the 23rd, 10th Panzer invested Calais. While fighting continued to rage around both ports, by May the 24th, 1st Panzer Division had reached the line of the Aar Canal, barely 10 miles from Dunkirk. At this moment, the Germans were closer to Dunkirk than most British formations, and between them and their objectives, there stood just one British Expeditionary Force battalion. Total victory was within the Germans' grasp, yet as they stood poised to deliver the coup de grace, they were stunned to receive orders to halt. The order to halt was issued by General von Rundstedt on the evening of the 23rd, despite Brauchisch's desire for a vigorous advance. Rundstedt wanted a pause to let his forces regroup. He had lost half his armour in the drive through France, though most of these losses had resulted from wear and tear rather than enemy action. Hitler not only approved his decision to halt the armour, he also gave orders that the halt be made permanent. As the Panzers were driving ever deeper into France, Hitler had become increasingly edgy and nervous. He feared that at any moment an Allied counterstroke could cut them off and deny him his imminent victory. Frightened by his own success, he preferred to pull the reins on his advancing columns rather than take any risks. Hitler may even have wanted to avoid destroying the VEF. While visiting Rundstedt, Hitler astonished his generals by speaking admiringly of the British Empire. He claimed all he wanted from Britain was that she acknowledge Germany's continental supremacy. Once France was defeated, Hitler assumed he could make peace with Britain. Sparing the British army would, Hitler believed, make that peace easier to reach. Above all, there was the influence of Hermann Göring. Göring was eager that the glory of the final victory should belong to the Luftwaffe. He argued that the Luftwaffe was much more loyal to the Nazi party than the army, and they therefore deserved the honour of the ultimate triumph. The Luftwaffe commander assured Hitler that his air force could finish off Dunkirk on its own. Göring's arguments gave Hitler the final justification he was looking for to halt the Panzers. Since May the 20th, a huge flotilla of ships of all sizes was being assembled along England's Channel coast in case the British Expeditionary Force would have to be evacuated. These would later be augmented by thousands of small boats, essential for ferrying troops from shore to ship. Many of the small boats, which included yachts, lifeboats, trawlers and more, were manned by civilian volunteers. The planned evacuation was codenamed Operation Dynamo and commanded by Vice Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay. At 1900 hours on May the 26th, Ramsay was ordered to commence Operation Dynamo. He had been counting on 3 French ports being available for the evacuation, but by now, both Boulogne and Calais had been captured. With Dunkirk the only port remaining in Allied hands, Ramsay feared no more than 45,000 troops would be rescued. On the evening of May the 25th, Lord John Galt had ordered the British Expeditionary Force to retreat to the sea. His decision was prompted by the critical position of the Belgian army on the Allied left. It had already used up all its reserves and was on the brink of collapse. Once the Germans overran the Belgian line, they could then strike at the British Army's exposed flank. Gort felt it was wiser to retreat than comply with Weygand's orders for an attack to the south. The following day, the Germans finally broke through the Belgian defences. Just as importantly, Hitler gave permission for Army Group A to resume its advance. On May the 27th, the exhausted Belgian army could fight no further, and King Leopold asked the Germans for an armistice. By dragging out the surrender negotiations, the Belgians managed to buy their allies an extra 24 hours in the life-or-death race for Dunkirk. Nonetheless, it took hard and desperate fighting by French and British forces to keep their escape